Hello, this is part three. We can call it the 60s, 1960s, and I would call this my kid years, actually. It was a fun time. I had a great life, a great childhood, and I think that these years in Kentucky really play out that way, and it'll be fun and interesting to share it with you. A lot of historical events occurred in the 60s. A lot of visual images kind of set those years apart. The Vietnam War, hippies, demonstrations, landing on the moon, the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, assassination of Martin Luther King, just a lot of different things. It was an age where we evolved from hi-fi music to stereo music. We evolved from black and white TV to color TV. Clothing changed kind of dramatically. There was a lot of use of daisies and make love, not war, peace symbols. Music changed a lot. It was kind of bebop and stuff in the early 60s, but during the 60s it would turn to what we would call hard rock, maybe even a little bit of heavy metal, but not a lot of the Metallica or none of the rap or anything that we have right now. But music did change, and you can follow that by, if you look at the Beatles music in the early 60s, it was really fun, upbeat kind of music, stuff that you tap your toe to, and then it got a little darker, a little morose in the later 60s, and that was indicative of most music and then groups and stuff. Movies too, up until the mid 60s, if you were to watch movies or TV, which I did a lot of as a latchkey kid at home. I would get off of school, either walk home or get off the bus, and I would get home and be home alone, and make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or a bologna and cheese sandwich and a glass of Kool-Aid, and I'd sit down, and at 4 o'clock in the afternoon they had old movies that were made in the 40s and 50s, mostly black and white, mostly westerns, mostly war movies, and there's always a good guy and a bad guy, and the good guys always won out, and there's always an interesting teachable theme, pretty predictable, but that's the environment that I was raised in, always watching a lot of heroes, John Wayne type things and stuff, and it was a good time. Also, because of my age and all of the things that were occurring, the news then was pretty balanced. You would get it straightforward. You didn't see a lot of bias or prejudice in any of the news that was being given. Most people would watch ABC, NBC, or CBS 30 minutes in the evening. I watched David Brinkley and Chet Huntley were my favorites. Walter Cronkite, a lot of people watched him. But I would spend hours and hours, in particular in the 60s. I was glued to the TV with all of the advances in space exploration, watching televised launches of the different missions that they had, and being excited about getting closer and closer to landing on the moon. And they had a couple of disasters where one capsule caught fire and killed all of the astronauts inside. That was a horrible thing to see and experience, and it showed just how risky it was what we were doing. And I think back now with our technology, they were going up in tin cans. Nowadays the technology is quite sophisticated, but to be a kid during that time was just incredible. I think I landed there in the second grade, and we were there on 9011 Thompson Lane in Pleasure Ridge Park, Kentucky, and lived in a little 3-bedroom home, had 1 bathroom, small kitchen, little living room, and that was it, really. But that was actually quite a large home for us. We didn't buy it though. We paid $100 a month in rent. I remember that number. And I had my own room, and my little sister Wendy, she had a room, and Mom and Dad had their room. And it had a little hallway, and I can remember when we were told to go to bed, as I'd sneak out into the hallway when we got our color TV, and my parents on Sunday night would be watching Bonanza and Walt Disney World that would come in vibrant colors. Even though I was supposed to be in bed, I'd be standing in the hallway looking around the corner so I could see and hear it and watch it. But a lot of incredible TV programs back then. Fun to watch: The Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, Lassie, Rin Tin Tin, Black Fury, the Beverly Hillbillies, the Munsters. I mean, I could go on and on. Great sitcoms. Before the time when they would try and interject political thought or ideology, nothing controversial really, just slapstick comedy or something serious or interesting. But it was fun TV to watch, and at times I wish we could go back to those days really. But so I started out the second grade. I don't remember much about my elementary years that would be of interest to people other than in the third grade. I didn't realize how important the Spanish language would be to me, but we had a teacher that loved Spanish, and I can remember her teaching us Spanish at that time, and I liked it. I don't know how good I was at it, but I can remember focusing on Spanish. Next thing that I remember learning is when I was in elementary school is I brought home a report card that I think was very good except conduct. I would get F's in conduct. I must have been talking too much or something. And so I remember Mom and Dad got after me, and I went to school, and I ended up getting A's and B's in conduct, but all my other grades dropped to C's and D's. And I remember Dad saying, he kind of chuckled about it, and he said, "Jeff, I'd rather you get an F in conduct than fail these other classes." And I never forgot that. I remember in elementary school, I had problems remembering or memorizing my multiplication tables and had to stay after school, and during the day was in the hallway with the principal as she pulled out these little cards, asked what was 9 times 7, 5 times 5, or whatever, little flashcards. But I just had a hard time doing my multiplication tables. However, what was interesting was at the end of my sixth grade year, I remember they had some type of a presentation or event. I remember my mom and dad went, and two things happened there. One was we had been taking spelling tests all year long in the sixth grade, and I remember they had 4 classes of sixth graders, and anyway, they announced in this meeting with all these parents and all these kids and stuff that were there that I had won the spelling contest or spelling bee contest for the year, which I had no idea that I was even in running for it. And I just remember taking the tests every Friday. Remember, they always had 10 words, and I would write them down and turn them in. But it was a shock to me. I wasn't told about it, and a big shock to my parents. But then at the end, they had another award, a Special Achievement Award, and they announced that I got that. And I remember my parents, after I got it, I sat down and they said, "Well, what did you get that for?" And I said, "I don't know." And they didn't know. And to this day, I don't know what the special achievement was. But it was towards the very end, and I have no idea what it was. But when I was walking up to get the award, we didn't have a lot of money, but I had to be dressed up for the event. And I had grown so fast that I could put my dad's shoes on. I didn't have dress shoes, so I put my dad's shoes on. He had a pair of military patent black leather shoes that I put on that night. They were a little bit too big for me, but not too big. But when I walked up on stage, the heel came off of one. And I had on one shoe that had a heel and one that didn't. But the shoe that didn't have a heel, it still had the nails sticking out. So when I walked across the wooden stage, my foot would get stuck, and I'd have to pick up my shoe and take another step and get stuck, and I pick up my shoe, and then I got the award, and I came down, and I was sticking on the stage, and it was one of those rare events that I just really haven't forgotten, and it was a fun time for us. I know that it made my parents proud. My teacher was Mrs. Johnson. I remember her because I think she was my first love. I really loved Mrs. Johnson. I think she liked me too. And oddly, when we transferred from the elementary school and I started junior high at Pleasure Ridge Park High School, they were all combined then, so when I was going into the 7th grade, before we were transferred after a few months down to Panama, the Panama Canal Zone, I had Mrs. Johnson again for my 7th grade teacher, which I thought was kind of interesting. When I would go to school in that 6th grade year, my little sister Wendy was starting the 1st grade, and I remember we would walk down to the bus, and I have a real regrettable memory of being embarrassed of having to walk with her to the bus stop, and I made her walk behind me on the way to the bus stop because I didn't want anybody to know that she was with me. And to this day, one of my deepest regrets in life was being mean to her about that, and hope that she has forgiven me for that. But another fun thing in elementary school was you had hallway patrolmen, and you would stand in the middle of the hall and you would keep kids moving. One side would go down one side, the other would go down the other, and you would find unruly kids and stuff. So you could be a patrolman, and you actually got a white sash, and you had a little sheriff's badge that you put on it. And I was made a patrolman not only in the hallway but outside where they had crossings, and it was just I can remember getting that sash and putting that badge on and thinking that was the greatest thing since sliced bread. But during that time as well, I remember being able to try out for the baseball team. Because I was taller than most kids, they put me on first base, and I enjoyed it. I remember it was so fun. I remember getting the baseball uniform. It was red. I remember the baseball socks going up to my knee, and the shoes with the cleats, and the baseball hat, and the vested shirt with the long gray sleeves and stuff, the kind of uniforms that they had back then. And to this day, I can still feel what it feels like about putting on a uniform that had colors and things like that. That was kind of cool. I don't think I went beyond one season for some reason. I must not have been very good. I do remember trying out for a baseball team in my 8th grade year, and I didn't make it. It didn't make the cut, so I must not have been a very, very good baseball player. But I did start to play basketball pretty early, mainly because I was taller. And the other thing, living in Kentucky, University of Kentucky, University of Louisville, even then and now, is still a basketball strength. And in the 40s, University of Kentucky under Adolph Rupp won quite a few national championships, and they had a basketball player named Dan Issel, a few others that were quite famous at that time, and it was great to watch Kentucky basketball. So all boys were outside throwing basketballs up against wooden backboards with nailed-on basketball rims, and playing for hours and hours and hours. So I remember getting into that because I was taller. I could play, and it was fun, and that led to basketball that I'll talk to you about a little bit later on. But that was really, it was a fun time. I had a lot of friends in the neighborhood. Just a neighborhood full of boys. Craig Schwartz, Larry Vessels, Gary Stamps. We would play basketball and football and just kind of hang out. Our neighborhood was in a place where behind the house there was an open field where grass would grow tall and had a few trees around, and we'd go out in that field all the time, and we'd dig foxholes and build forts with old pieces of wood and walk along the ditch, and when the creek would freeze over, we'd walk on the ice, and we'd go out and try and shoot birds with BB guns, and we'd find rabbit nests and take the baby rabbits out and try and raise the baby rabbits. They either all died or we ended up letting them go. But again, really fun years. But I grew from being a second grader to almost a seventh grader in that environment. My Uncle Perry and Aunt Ella lived about a mile away, and my Uncle Perry was in construction, and he would go off and build roads and build bridges and things like that for the state. And I remember a bunch of projects around there that he was involved in, that even just a few years ago I went back and looked at those projects. They're still standing 50, 60 years later, so that's kind of cool. But that's where I began to work as well. When I was in probably it would have been the 4th and the 5th grade, I began to mow lawns. I remember $3 was my cheap rate. If it was a bigger lawn, it was $5. And I can remember over the course of a couple, 2 or 3 years, that inched up to around $10 per lawn. One fun experience I had, not fun, but one memory I guess I had, was I mowed somebody's lawn that were really particular, and I ran out of gas with just one strip left to mow that was like maybe 30 yards long and maybe 20 inches wide. And this was a long way from my house. I didn't have any money to buy any more gas or any place to get it. And all I had was the lawnmower and a pair of hand clippers. And I took the hand clippers and I had to finish up that whole row with my hand, just clipping it. And make sure that it looked good as well. But I can remember that dilemma in my early childhood. Girls became kind of interesting to me at the time, not quite so much. I remember there was a girl that I liked. I'm sure I never talked to her. I'm sure she didn't know that I existed, but for some reason I liked her. Norma, Norma was her name, and I remember I went underneath one of those bridges that my uncle built, and with a little bottle of red paint for my plastic model cars that I was making at the time, I painted Jeff plus Norma. And I went back to that bridge a few years ago. This would be 55 years later, and that's still there. So, and again, I know for certain she didn't know that I existed, but those are kind of fun years. My family was, we were kind of a typical family, but my parents would get together with my dad's family, and they'd get together on holidays. We'd have big meals. They'd be talking, having fun. There was a lot of drinking in my family and smoking. I mean, that was what the 60s were. My family didn't drink whiskey or things like that, but there was a lot of beer, and they would, in the course of the activities and stuff, many would get drunk, and some would get crazy, others would get mean. Sometimes they'd have a fight. I just remember that environment, and smoke-filled rooms, and playing cards. They'd play canasta, and then the guys later at night would move into poker, and they'd play poker with pennies, nickels, and dimes until the next morning. And I can remember a couple of times asking Dad how it went, and he had won $10 or something all night, which was pretty good money back then, I would guess. But that's kind of what our life was like at that point. I remember Mom and Dad began to have. I began to be old enough to see the gravity of the fights that they would have. To this day, and even then as a young kid, I would see them as being somewhat childish. Fights over things that you didn't need to fight over. I think the drinking played into that a lot, and I think sometimes perhaps a little bit of jealousy played into it in different ways. But that was just the life that I had at that point. It would play into different things later on in my life, but again, I think I had a great childhood. even then, we had McDonald's, we had Kentucky Fried Chicken, but we really didn't go out to eat much. If we went out to eat, it would be to go get an upper end hamburger at Big Boy's or something like that. We would never go to a nice sit down restaurant at that time. It just wasn't part of our culture, and we just didn't have the money. I remember my lifelong friendship with my father began at an early age. We just connected. I adored my dad, was proud of him. He was a guy that was in the military, and at an early age, he would take me hunting. We'd go fishing. We'd go down into the country in Kentucky, visit his brothers that were spread out in different areas. He would sometimes come home in his Air Force uniform, and he was involved in recruiting at the time, and he might be pulling a fairgrounds missile behind his truck for recruiting purposes. So we'd have a Air Force missile sitting in our front yard. But my dad was always involved in being able to build things and stuff. I can remember him buying old cars and fixing them up, and he built me. We got a couple of axles, and he built me a wooden go-kart with a steering wheel that I could take out and drive around. I remember that he loved animals, loved for me to like animals. We had dogs and everything, but he used to like to get these little order quail eggs and incubate them in the house until they hatched, and then we'd feed them, and then we'd let them go in the backyard. And we started raising rabbits. I remember getting rabbits, and Dad built these really sophisticated rabbit cages that had the doors and the little hutches in them and places to water the rabbits, and he had the little chicken wire that the rabbits could run around in, and built a little aluminum slide underneath so the rabbit droppings would hit and kind of roll down into a big pile, so it was easy to clean things up and stuff like that. But we raised rabbits, and he painted a really cute. Dad liked to paint. He created a sign. To this day, I got it in my head, called "Bunnies for Sale," $1. And we had these bunnies, and when they got old enough, we'd stick that sign out in the yard, and before we knew it, we'd sell 8 or 9 of those bunny rabbits, and I'd always have the money. That's how I made some of the money that we had, and yeah, those were great years. I remember they had something in Kentucky called the Kentucky Fairgrounds and the Kentucky State Fair, and you'd go, and that was a fun thing to go to. They'd have rodeos and animals and carnival rides and things like that. But I remember a guy named Fess Parker, a real famous Disney actor who played Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett, came, and I've got a picture of my dad with Fess Parker, and he was about 6'10", maybe, and my dad was not a tall guy, 5'9", 5'10", and you see them together, and it's really awkward. But Fess Parker was a tall, handsome guy, and still, was in movies for many years. He died about 12, 13 years ago. But be an interesting person for you to look up and see who he is. Many trips we would take down to Kentucky, lower part of Kentucky, in the Brownsville, Bowling Green area, where my dad was born, in Edmonson County. And we would go visit, and the family was very poor, but you wouldn't know it. They weren't victims. They didn't appear poor. They were happy people. We'd go, and they'd be sitting on their porches. Never had air conditioning or anything like that, and they still lived a lot off the land at that time. They would like to hunt, and they'd fish. And I remember once we went down, and it was Hog Day. We went down and watched the whole entire process of sticking a pig, letting it bleed out, and then the rest of the day we'd boil the skin to get the hair off. We'd cut off the different parts, separate the pig's feet, the pig's tongue, the pig brain, the the meat, do things with the fat to make lard. I mean, it was quite an experience as a kid to be able to see that happen. It was very, very memorable for me, and has given me an appreciation for people. And I remember while there is that we would go into the storage or the root cellars or the cellars of the different families where they would stock up. They'd have bottles and bottles of tomatoes and peaches and green beans. I remember a lot of good green beans and that little bin with potatoes in them and turnips and really, really cool to see all that honeycombs. And they'd go out and they would have beehives, and then they would have natural beehives that they would find, and they would collect this honey and milk, cream. They always had a barn full of tobacco. Tobacco was a big crop, and I would go down over a couple summers and work with my Uncle Trenton, hanging tobacco, which is kind of a dusty, when you're hanging it, it's like hanging a cornstalk upside down on these little boards that would run across the top of the barn. And you'd hang them up somewhat green, and they would dry out. And then you would harvest it. Somebody would come, and when it was all dried and brown and stuff, they'd collect it all, put it in the back of the truck, take it off, and they'd crush it all up and make cigarettes out of it. So that was fun. I did go down to Uncle Trenton's place a couple times when I was younger, stay for 2 or 3 weeks, and I would do that work and help Aunt Donnie collect blackberries. And at the end of the day, Aunt Donnie would make me a black cobbler, which still makes my mouth water. And she'd put homemade ice cream over the top of it. Again, wasn't my childhood great? And when I was down there, I remember it was the first time that I could go hunting alone. My dad bought me the most beautiful gun, and I still have it. It's a black, silver-plated 410 single shot shotgun, and I got that for either my Christmas or a birthday. But I could take it down to Uncle Trenton's, and when I was done with everything, I could walk out into the woods and go squirrel hunting. And the first time I took the gun, first time I went out squirrel hunting, I was out and I saw the squirrel and was climbing up the tree and everything else, and had to wait. My heart was beating. This is the first time I was really hunting alone, and I took the shot, and the squirrel fell down from the tree and fell into a big pile of leaves, and I was so excited. And Mom and Dad and a bunch of other relatives were back at the farmhouse, so I grabbed that squirrel and headed off, and the squirrel wasn't dead, and it bit my finger, didn't let go. I had the squirrel hanging off my hand, and I'm walking up to the house, and it just hurt like a dickens. My finger's bleeding, the squirrel is squirming around, its tail's flipping, and I've got the gun in one hand, and the squirrel's hanging off of it, and I go up to these people, and the only way they can get it off is just keep squeezing the squirrel's head until it opened its jaws. So that was my first hunting experience. I've had a lot of fun hunting experiences with my dad, but that was kind of a fun thing at that point. Oh goodness, it was a great time. I remember watching TV during the political environment when Bobby Kennedy was shot. That played out like a movie. A politician running to be president, and then he's shot, and people gather around him, and they're scuffling around, not knowing what happened. And then very soon, I think thereafter, Martin Luther King was assassinated by a rifle. It was during the civil rights movements in the 60s and stuff, and to have a very, very good, peaceful leader shot like that was a real stigma on the 60s, but I can remember that played out in my lifetime at that point. So anyway, I hope this has been interesting, kind of telling you about that particular arena. My personal interest at the time, I remember I began to read, and I liked reading. I started getting into books like the Black Stallion series by Walter Farley, the Hardy Boys I had read a little bit earlier, the mystery books that were really fun to read. And Jules Verne wrote the most incredible books. I can remember reading those. Those were fantastic books about journeying to the moon or going to the center of the earth or 20,000 leagues underneath the sea, or I mean, I could go on and on. Again, for a boy to be able to read those, it was fun and exciting for me. But I can remember I had one experience which is really unique. My mom, who was a great mom, but mom always had to work. And I really respect her for that because she was a breadwinner, always was very good with money. We always had what we needed because both mom and dad worked, and dad would work a second job. But mom would still come home and cook, and she would cook good meals. I mean, good meals for the 50s. We'd have a lot of goulash and casserole dishes and fried chicken and mashed potatoes and things that to this day still seem like real food to me. But I can remember that I stuttered, still was stuttering, and I was shy, and it was hard for me to, I was probably worried about making friends, but I can remember I heard about a book, and I called mom and said, Mom, I think I was in the 6th grade, I said, Mom, I said, could you pick up a book for me at the bookstore? And she laughed and she said, what book? How to Make Friends and Influence People? And I said, yeah, that was the book that I had heard about. And she said, really? I said, yeah. And I had researched it and stuff, and it was by Dale Carnegie, and it was a famous book at the time. Still probably is today, and it's a book I'd recommend to anybody. But how to win friends and influence people. And so she bought that book and brought it home, and I read it, I marked it, learned a lot from it about comportment and treating people, and it's a great book. And in fact, I've not found a book about relationships that would be any better. So I had that book for years and years and years, and in some move it's disappeared. But I kept that book such that the white pages had been yellowed and even began to disintegrate. But it was a pleasant memory, and I was glad that mom got that for me. So anyway, the next one, part 4, I'll go into what I'd call my teenage years, where we picked up from Kentucky, and my dad was transferred to the Panama Canal Zone down in Central America. And what a wonderful bunch of experiences I had there as well. So